Good evening, everyone. Welcome to JWA Book Talks. I am Judith Rosenbaum of the Jewish Women's Archive. Very glad to be with all of you here tonight. Um, Please say hello in the chat box. Make sure to chat to everyone. We love to know who's with us in the room. The chat box is also where you can add questions, and I will try to bring those in as we have our conversation. A few words about JWA for anyone who is new to us. We are a digital archive that works to transform how we understand history and Jewish culture by documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories. We also pay special attention to how gender functions in the past and present. And we do all of this work because we believe that uncovering a more diverse and nuanced story helps to create a better world. So thank you for being our partners in this effort. The book talks are just one piece of the work that JWA does. I hope you will check out jwa.org to explore the full range of things that we offer, the projects and resources that we have. A quick logistical note, if you would like captioning, you can turn them on by clicking the button that says CC or show captions at the bottom of your screen. Okay, I am delighted to introduce this evening's author. Marcy Syms is former chair and CEO of Syms Corp. And a founding trustee and president of the Cy Syms Foundation. A social entrepreneur and activist in the field of gender equality, she has helped start organizations and served on dozens of boards in both the for-profit and nonprofit sectors. Marcy was a fellow recently at Harvard's Advanced Leadership Initiative program and is the author of Mind Your Own Business and Keep It in the Family, which is widely taught in business schools. Her new book, which we will be discussing tonight, is Leading with Respect: Adventures of an Off-Price Fashion Pioneer. Welcome, Marcy. So glad to have you here with us tonight.
Oh, Judith, it's great to be with you and to everyone who is listening.
Wonderful. Well, your book is just such a joy to read. It brings together so many different strands of stories, the history of Syms and off-price retail, the story of your particular family business, your own leadership journey, the lessons you've learned through business, philanthropy, and activism. And I know that I'm sure for many of us, we have our own memories of Syms that we bring to this conversation. I personally used to go with my family to shop at the one in Paramus when I was a kid, and we lived in New Jersey at the time. So if anyone has a memory of Syms that you would like to share in the chat, please feel free to drop it there. We can have a little nostalgia fest there. But where I really wanted to start our conversation is actually with the title of your book, Leading with Respect. You begin, that's the title, you begin the prologue by talking about the theme of respect, and it really runs through the entire book. It's really a touchstone throughout the book. So tell us a little bit about what that means for you and how you understand the foundation of respect in this work.
When I started thinking about what I needed to share, if I really wanted to be a witness to my own journey and how it might be useful to others, it was how foundational respect has always been. To me, the very decision for joining Syms was because my father respected me. And I had worked in other places. I have a story to share that I don't get into very much in the book, but I will share it here. I was working at a radio station. I was very happy with my job. It was like a dream job for me. I was producing a radio show and I was assistant to the president of the radio station. So I was getting to learn so much about managing a station, which was my ultimate goal. The person who was the vice president was not a nice guy, and he was not someone I respected. He was having an affair with one of the female producers, and he was married and had three young children. So I'm not really good. I don't have a poker face. So he probably realized that I thought he was a sleazebag. And that didn't do me much good because as the story continued, my boss was invited to become the head of the Voice of America in Washington. And this vice president was elevated to be in charge when he left. And so one of the first things he did was come into my office, close the door, swish his chair around, and get on like he was hopping on a saddle and said, "Marcy, what do you want here?" And for some reason, this has happened throughout my life. Bette Davis took over my being. Joan Crawford came out of my, watching too much black and white film when I was a kid.
Came
And
in handy.
yeah, and I said, I want your job. And he said, you're fired. I knew I was going to get fired anyway, but it's just to point up. I just never felt anything that I really said was being heard. I had worked as a paralegal before that. I had worked at an ad agency before that, doing media planning. I always felt that when I was in a meeting, I'd say something and no one acted like they heard me. And then a few minutes later, a guy would say it and everyone heard him. And it was very discouraging because I was ambitious. And so when my father asked me to join him, I thought, number one, he's not going to fire me. And, and number two, if he doesn't understand something I say, or if I don't say something correctly, he'll respect me enough to talk about it. We'll have a conversation. I'll actually learn something. Besides which, I thought my father is a retail genius. What he was doing was amazing, even back then. And I knew there was real growth potential. But at the real crux of it was I wanted so desperately to feel respected, that my contribution would be respected. And that's and then and by the time I joined Sims, it was my dad had already come up with the more you know. No, he had already, that was my line. He had already come up with an educated consumer is our best customer. Now think about it. An educated consumer is our best customer. That means you respect the intelligence of your customer.
Right.
And we always said, and you walked into the store and you always saw the signs that explained everything. And we didn't have salespeople, we had
I
educators.
love that. I hadn't realized that you called them that, and I thought that was such a cool thing.
Yeah, yeah. As a matter of fact, one of the coolest things was like in, I don't know, it was like 1990 or something. The New York Times made a cartoon and they crossed out salesperson and they're now educators. Vocabulary, gosh, as we are relearning in this moment of propaganda, vocabulary is so critical to communications and understanding.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's why it's called leading with respect. And I felt that my dad, that was always his North Star.
hmm Well, and you preempted my next question, which was going to be about that slogan. And I love that Ezra in the comments said that he's a third generation educated consumer. So, that
Great.
educated consumer that pays off because everyone wants to be that, right? Not to feel like you're trying to pull something over on your customers, and also respecting your salespeople and really seeing them as playing such an important role in the process as well.
Absolutely. And to that point, when you were hired at Sims, first of all, we had a very different kind of interviewing process than most companies. But when you were hired at Sims at the store level, you were you had the first 3 weeks where you were trained in every job in the store. This cost the company, this was quite an investment for the
Yeah.
company. But we felt it would, number one, provide us with a coworker who would be comfortable in any place in the store, which was very important to us, which we called the one store concept. But also, it let this person, oftentimes someone who may not have worked in retail before, figure out what they felt good at. What
Mhm.
was their affinity towards? Was it the fitting room, the register, stock, or setting up gondolas and end caps with merchandise? And so it was really terrific. But there were a few places that did that. You were hired for a particular job, and that's where you were.
Right. Well, and you can do the best. You can understand the process best and therefore be the best at your job if you see how your piece fits into the whole picture.
Totally,
Yeah, that makes
totally.
a lot of sense.
Just I wanted to say something, Judith, about this idea of the educated consumer, because when my dad uh, said that for the first time, it was on live TV. It was at the halftime show of Sunday football. It was a Giants game.
Hmm.
And he was for the local NBC station, a customer. who was a broadcaster, had invited him to do a commercial for a trade of clothing.
Hmm.
And because he was in a men's business then,
Right.
right? And he had sizes that fit the football guys. So he said, and it was because of that that got Cy thinking, because he had been doing radio commercials. He did a 60-second live commercial. I'll never forget, we were listening at home. We all kind of got around to listen to this live commercial. And my father wanted to say educated consumer. I had said it should be an informed consumer because I thought educated was too elitist.
Hmm.
And my father, to the point that you made just a few minutes ago, said, educated is aspirational. And he was so right.
Yeah. Well, and he clearly also thought on his feet really well if he came up with that kind of
Yeah.
on the spot. But that seemed to be one of his skills.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, it came from years and years and years of dealing with customers, working in his brother's stores. Brother was 14 years older, had a store right where the Freedom Tower is, actually across the street where now the in Lower Manhattan it's the Freedom Tower. Oh, it's the museum store across
Hmm.
from, that's where the Mearns store was. That was the
Hmm.
name of it.
Um, so let's take a step back also to your family, because you were the oldest of six siblings, which is its own kind of leadership training ground. How did that experience influence you and your leadership?
Oh my God. Well, again, to bring my father into the conversation, when asked why your daughter is president of the company when you have three sons working in the business, my father said, well, when she was a girl and we sent her with the kids to the movies and I gave her money, she always came back with change and no one complained about not getting enough candy.
Hmm.
And that's kind of a little tip of the iceberg of some of my training. It was to try to be someone who was a peacemaker as the eldest child. My mom also, who is a lovely woman, as she's 98 years old, and I'm going down to see her in Florida tomorrow morning, and I see her about every 6 weeks. Anyway, she suffered pretty severe postpartum depression, and she had children every 2 years. So I really had a lot more than I should have had, kind of motherly responsibilities for my siblings. And and I think that made me mature beyond my years.
Hmm.
I also think it's something that to a certain extent my father probably, even though he was working such long hours and 6 days a week, he probably knew.
I'm sure. Yeah.
So, there's a little bit of that. Um, I must say that being the oldest of six, also from the standpoint of being able to stay up when my dad came home from work
Hmm.
and hearing about this outside world that I coveted no end, was a treat. And as a younger child, I probably wouldn't have gotten to do that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And just to think about, the ways in which years of hearing those stories, even if you had no intention of going into the family business, was set the stage for, having so much background in the work and having deeper insight into it than you would have if you had come in, sort of without that context, both in terms of understanding all the ins and outs of the business and also understanding how your dad thought about it, how he talked about it. I'm sure gave you a lot of insight into the way that he was kind of puzzling through what the work was.
Absolutely. I think that listening all those years beforehand, um, the comfort level with not only the respect by which he talked about his suppliers and his customers, well, it was also this sense of integrity
Hmm.
that being an entrepreneur, every decision you make is a building block. and you have to live through that decision, and whether it turns out right or wrong. I think that I gained a lot of interest in being an entrepreneur
Hmm.
from seeing the passion, the excitement, the accomplishments, and also the sense of gratification when you actually succeed at something that has your fingerprints all over it.
Hmm.
Fantastic.
Right. And I guess in a family business, and especially the way that you and your dad ran things, you were so associated with the brand, right? Like Sarah in the comments is mentioning your dad being in the ads and saying he had such a great radio voice. Is that why he decided to star in his own ads? And you were in ads too.
Yeah,
And that's pretty unusual, I think,
yeah.
right? Like to do your own ads and to really put yourself sort of in the clothes and in the store and put it in your own voice.
But it is distinctive because the observation about his voice. My father wanted to be a play-by-play sports announcer. He studied to be a recording sports announcer, like doing the Yankees game, for instance. That was
Hmm.
like his Nirvana dream, and he studied broadcasting. That was really what he did. He worked with a recording to get rid of his Brooklyn accent. He would work with a recorder for 6 or 8 hours. In point of fact, I mean, I even have had experiences being with him. The funny story, we were in the where we had the store at Falls Church, Virginia, and we were at the White Flint Mall, and we're on an escalator, and my father's in front talking to someone, and I'm back, and this woman who's like parallel with me, and she said, "Isn't that Cy Sims?" And I said, "Yes, it is." She said, "Oh, that voice, that voice." And then when we got to the bottom, I said to my father, I want to introduce you, Dad. She's a very good customer and she's very happy to meet you. She never knew that I was Marcy, even
Mm.
though I was already doing the commercials. First of all, I never dressed like my age because I started doing the commercials. I wanted to be 20 years older
Hmm.
when I did them. That's number one. And number two is I was always conscious of trying to bring my voice deeper.
Hmm.
We went through that whole time where you can't be taken seriously if you have the Jackie O voice.
Hmm.
So I was always talking lower. And so I didn't sound the same way as I would do a commercial today.
Hmm. Mm. Interesting. Well, it was fun. I found some old commercials on YouTube and watched them, and it was
Ah,
fun to revisit those. Uh,
I did that too upon the insistence of my assistant, who I wrote about in the book. They called me, what was that? Murphy Brown for a while. For the first 6 years working at Sims, I went through like 12 uh, assistants,
uh-huh.
people to help me, and then I happened on Rick Terrio, who was my assistant for about 24 years, and fabulous, and he had a fabulous
Very
career.
lucky to have that kind of long-term
Yeah,
relationship.
yeah, and he went on to a great career. But the thing is that you have this kind of expectation for yourself of what you want to be and how you want to present yourself, and it just kind of irked me if uh, someone was lazy and didn't want to make. And if I was always really trying hard. I'm a worker. I'm as a long time ago, Helen Gurley Brown, who
Hmm.
started Cosmopolitan magazine, said she was a worker bee, and I'm a worker bee, and I don't do well with people who aren't worker bees.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that is part of the one of the things I think that goes along with a culture of respect is also trust, right? That you
Yeah,
trust that if you are going to put yourself into your work, you trust other people to be doing the same and to kind of meet that with the same kind of commitment. And
yeah.
it's part of that respect. It's knowing someone has, believing that somebody is capable of doing that kind of level of work.
You're absolutely right. And actually, I don't think there can be trust without respect. I don't think there can be respect without trust.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So one of the things that really struck me reading your book is that it seems like you have always been a feminist. Um,
Yes.
and so I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about sort of the origins of your feminism and, sort of who influenced you and where you found that emerging in your life, even before you became a kind of real activist
Oh,
later on.
yeah. Well, there really was a moment, and I was 11 years old. I didn't know the word then. 2 years later, or 3 years later, I read the book Feminine Mystique and I learned the word. But I became a feminist at 11 when my mom, who found out that she was going to be giving birth to her sixth child, tried to find a way to get her tubes tied.
Mm.
And my father had to sign a release, but my mother, to her humiliation, had to get three doctors to sign off and agree that she was not fit to have another child. And that was the only way she could do it.
Mm.
And as an 11-year-old young woman, and someone who saw how she suffered after giving birth, this was so humiliating to watch her go through this. It was so cruel
Hmm.
and so unnecessary. And it was all men doctors. I have nothing against men doctors, but did they really understand what she was going through?
Right.
And so I became a feminist. And honestly, it was epiphanal. And I never saw things through a different lens after that.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I can imagine that witnessing that experience with your mother and growing up with an ethic of respect, that is a big clash with respect. It is
Yeah.
really not an experience of respecting someone to make an adult woman to make decisions about her own life and body.
And here we are, aren't we?
Right, exactly. I mean, and we see that I think there's echoes of that through a lot of medical things still where there's um, you know, ways that there still is not respect for women to make their own decisions or ways that women's own, bodily experiences are not acknowledged or respected or listened to. Unfortunately, that is some of the policies have changed and then some have changed back, but it still is a theme that makes its way through many different aspects of our society.
Totally.
You talk a little bit about your bat mitzvah in the book as well. Tell us about
Oh,
your
yes.
feminist activism around your bat mitzvah.
So, um, first 4 years of my life, we were in Brooklyn. And when my mom got pregnant with the third child, it was a one-bedroom apartment. I slept in the hall. And we moved to this home on the GI Bill. My father, as a first-generation American, and part of the generation that changed the US economy forever, got this house in Yonkers. And the community was a melting pot, truly a melting pot. There were there was the Saltrees Jamaican family across the street in a little house. We were in a little house. The Horns next door, who were German, had a little house. There were the Dinatellis and the Gallaghers and the Knights, and everyone had a different background. What they all had in common, except Saltrees, the black family, because he served in the military, but blacks did not get, women did not get, and blacks did not get the GI
Yeah,
Bill.
Bill. Yeah.
But the
One of the
all
good examples of structural racism and sexism in our country that had
correct,
a huge
right,
impact on generational wealth. Yeah.
totally. That's really a big chunk. So all of these families had these homes, and they were in burgeoning communities with expanding schools. It was really fantastic. And where was I going with this?
Your bat mitzvah.
Oh, thanks. So when we got there, we didn't belong to a temple when we lived in Brooklyn, but when we got there, one of the ways in which I spent time with my dad, because my mom really didn't go, was going to synagogue. It was a conservative new temple, and it was called Lincoln Park Jewish Center, right across from the Yonkers racetrack on the Deegan Expressway going to New York City. And the way that you met the kids was to go to Sunday school, to go to Hebrew school. So I went diligently, but they didn't give girls bat mitzvahs. There were no bat mitzvahs.
Hmm.
Well, I started campaigning when I was about 11. Funny about that, right?
Yeah.
And
Important moment.
right, I said, I want to have a bat mitzvah. Well, so what I had was I was able to get a Bible. I was able to perform in the Friday night service. I could not Saturday morning. And I could not have a photo. I do not have a picture of this. I have no record of it. And I did have a party,
Hmm.
which was great. Uh, but that was another opportunity to feel incensed, actually, by the sheer stupidity of that. Forget about tradition. And it's just dumb with all the changes happening around us. And you, you're the girl. My parents didn't promote this. My parents were like, my father went to synagogue maybe 6 times a year.
Hmm.
I was the one who wanted to be more a part of the community. I was the one who said, I need to do this. And not to reward that kind of religious ambition is dumb.
Yep. Well, and it's so interesting to look at the history of bat mitzvah. And JWA has lots of resources on this for anyone who wants to dig deeper. Um, but to see that exactly that disconnect, that kind of cognitive dissonance that you're describing at a time when girls and women were gaining access in all these other ways and becoming educated more in a Jewish context as well. But then there was still this line of like, well, you've educated me, but you don't let me do this thing like the boys. Why is that? And it really took until the 70s and in some communities, even the 80s, before there was more parity around bar and bat mitzvah, which is fascinating because it was really kind of a delayed response, especially since the first bat mitzvah was, you know, in 1922. So there was plenty of
Right.
time to get there, but it took a long time to for those changes to happen. And it was really the activism of girls in large part, and sometimes of their moms in some cases, that made that change. It was a change that really came from the bottom up, which is how a lot of changes happen. So
Yes.
it's important for us to remember that often the young people lead the way, and we need to listen to them because they know exactly what they want and what is right.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think that fortunately, this is a rite of participation and a rite of passage that I don't actually think will ever be taken back from Jewish women. It
Mhm.
will always be available now.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Um, we have a question from Allison about Filene's basement and whether you talk about that in the book, and we will get to that, Allison, I promise. But um, before we get to that, we also had a question about some of the decisions that your dad did not, some of the different business ideas that your dad didn't support, and that raises a question I wanted to ask, which is like it's clear in the book that your dad was a brilliant businessman, and also that you worked very well with him, which I think in part speaks to his ability to accept you as a partner and his ability to recognize all that you brought, and also your ability to manage him and to balance the needs of the company and your own needs and his needs
Yes.
and do all of that. And you clearly brought a lot of skill to that. How can you talk a little about sort of how you managed all of that and how you what you brought to the partnership that made it possible to be so successful? Because I think in many cases that probably is really tricky and not as successful in many family businesses, I would guess.
Absolutely. The first book I wrote was came out in 1992. It took 4 years to write. It was called Mind Your Own Business and Keep It in the Family. And I interviewed 46 family businesses, some large, some small. And I wanted to find out what made a family business successful. And the determining factors were two generations working together, and that the bottom line was they were profitable. And so I spoke to the folks at Kohler, way back when, and I spoke to folks at Echo Scarf and all those companies in between. And it really became quite a wonderful project that reinforced what I knew worked and what I knew didn't. And what I knew that worked, having worked with my father and my three brothers and two sisters at one time, they were all in the business. Um, you have to be willing to be open to communications, even if you don't like what you're hearing.
Mm.
You really need to spend the time to do that. There has to be time. You have to make time. My father was the youngest of 10, and he had six older sisters. And they were immediately above him, the six older sisters. And his parents were older in those days, like his father was like 50 when he was born.
Well, if he
And
was the 10th, there had to be some
yeah,
some time there. Yeah.
yeah, right. Um, two died in infancy, so there were eight. But the point is, he told me when growing up that his sisters, my aunts, were the wisest people he knew because they knew how to do things the American way. He
Mm.
would never ask his parents or older people at home. He would ask them how to dress. He would ask them how to, you know, what makes a guy popular. Should I ask this girl out? What should I say? I mean, he really looked to them for advice.
Hmm.
And I think that helped me be accepted. I really, really do. But I would say that in a family, it's so hard to separate the roles that you had in the family from the roles at business, because the two systems, the two social systems we're talking about, are diametrically opposed. A family is supposed to always embrace you and unconditional love, and a business is you got to measure up, you got to produce, and what did you do for me lately? And so it is a real challenge. It's really, really hard. I would say that I didn't manage my father so much as I managed my own expectations
Mm.
of what his bandwidth was,
Hmm.
and took my lead from where he was. And when he would disagree with something that I wanted very much for us to do, he'd say to me, "Don't give up, just think of another way to get at it." And I wouldn't give up. And an example of that was that he didn't want to accept credit cards.
Hmm.
And we were like, I think we were a real oddity. I understood why. I really understood why. Cash and carry. You want a great deal? Where's the cash? The
Sure.
problem was, and where I finally got him after years, was that it cost us more in bad checks
Mm.
than it cost us to pay the 2.5%
Right.
on the credit card. And that's what finally won the argument. So I did it all in marketing and consumer behavior and ease of purchase and record keeping and all those kind of things. But it really came down to the brass tacks of dollars and cents.
And was there a shift when you became the CEO in 1998, or did that not make as much of a difference in the kind of your relationship and the way things functioned internally?
When I joined the company 5 years later, we took the company public. One of the things that Cy and I did, well, I did, and I shared it with him. Not that I'm saying it was all, neat and well pointed, but it was a plan. I gave him a 5 year plan. He asked me,
Hmm.
and I had one. But in 5 years, I didn't have the plan to go public. I had a plan that had to do with growth,
Hmm.
expansion of our offerings. I was very excited about the idea of including children and domestics and luggage and all those kinds of things. Um, but what happened was the real change came when we went public. And that was only 5 years after I joined the company, because when my father said to me, Burlington Coat had just gone public at a 30 multiple. That was unheard of in
Hmm.
1983 for a retail company. I mean, if you got over 15, it was wacky. And here they go public for 30. And we were visiting a store together, and we get out of the store, and we're sitting in the car where a lot of good conversations take place. And,
Yes. You don't have to look each other in the eye that way.
right, right. And he said, Marcy, I'm thinking of taking the company public. I want to look into that. And I was quiet. It just, and I thought about it, and I thought, well, if I said I wasn't for it without knowing more about it, that would be pretty stupid. So I just said, oh, yeah, I think we should explore that. Sure. And he said he had just spoken to Milstein, Monroe Milstein, who was the founder of Burlington Coat. And Monroe said, quote, the Wall Street guys are crazy. So Cy said, I think we should cash in on their crazies.
And that's what made the foundation possible, right?
Correct. That's what started the foundation. The company did not need the money. My father really took the proceeds along with his decision to start a foundation. The foundation in the beginning was all for the stores, though.
Mm.
It was really a way in which to amplify our community involvements.
Hmm.
But going through the process, I went on the road show with him. You know, it was a dog and pony show, and I wasn't the dog or the pony. I was the dessert, sort of, because I was it was the promise, this is the future. And I talked about the future and all that. And the investment bankers were the ones who said, we need to have an organizational chart here. People just can't do whatever needs to be done, which is an entrepreneurial culture. You're going to have assigned and, some sort of an order. So I was made president of the company. And 6 months after we opened, it was clear that more than a president, I was a chief operating officer, because that was part of what was really good about my father and I. You asked before about complementing each other and getting along, working together, because we really did have very different skills and
Hmm.
we excelled at different things. My father was a brilliant communicator. He was really terrific at verbalizing what he saw. And I'm not saying I was handicapped in that way, but I was much more detail oriented than him. And he didn't want to be bothered. And once we went public, it was very interesting. He didn't enjoy the Wall Street experience, even though he didn't want to go private when we wanted so much, my brothers and I wanted so much to take the company private again.
Hmm. Well, and when Sims went public, you became the youngest female president of a New York Stock Exchange listed company. And certainly you were, I'm sure, often throughout your career, if not the only woman in the room, then often the only woman in the room, in the worlds that you were moving in. Tell us a little bit about what that was like. What were the challenges and lessons of that experience?
I took lessons from outside, from people who had been successful. I took a page, Golda Meir was always my idol, the woman who could lead a country and also serve tea.
Right.
So I never tried to be stronger or more than I was, but I did try to come across smarter than I was.
Hmm.
And I learned that that was a losing proposition, because people find that out. And when I say smarter, I mean, not recognizing just because I had the title, that didn't mean that I knew everything about a foundation of a building when we were building a building, or that I knew everything about the tax code in Baltimore. These kinds of things where you, as the only woman in the room, sometimes you already feel a little bit like, imposter syndrome because it's such an oddity,
Mhm.
but you also feel insecure from the standpoint, if you aren't the smartest person about the topic being discussed, how do you share that?
Mhm.
And ultimately, you share it by saying, you know, this is something I know I'm going to have to know more about. Do you think you could explain it to me?
Mhm.
Um, the other thing that I found most challenging was because I walked in the room as Sai's daughter. People outside thought I was the wife,
Mhm.
but people in the business knew I was the daughter. And I would, it would be assumed until they got to know me and that I was there because I was the daughter.
Right.
Now, I'm there because I'm the daughter, yes, but also my father was much, much too ambitious to hand something over to someone who is, you know, not going to ask good questions.
For sure.
So that took a little doing. I think a son might have had that same experience, though.
Mhm.
So that was where my experience was a little different than let's say if I worked for 3M or Xerox or IBM or something.
Right.
So I think that compounding of it, the assumption of your nepotism is why you're in the room, was something else to get over.
Mhm. Right. It just kind of compounds the sexism as well. It adds another element.
Yes, yes.
Um, so maybe let's get to that Filene's question because you talk in the book about the amazing sort of brilliant value proposition that made Sims so successful. And then, which was really kind of creating this model of off price, and how important that was not only for the consumers, but also for the manufacturers, that really being sort of the key of giving them the uh, commitment of taking the things that weren't going to sell. And that was so helpful for them. But then things start to shift. So first of all, what begins to change, and then maybe share us a little bit from the book about the Filene's chapter.
Well, the world really changed, particularly after, if we remember, uh, what was it, 2002K,
Right,
you know,
Y2K.
Y2K, and then the 9/11 and Casual Friday and factory outlets and Nordstrom's Rack and Saks Off Fifth and TJ Maxx
And online shopping.
and online shopping, which today ubiquitous. And I even during COVID gave in. I never gave in before, but during COVID, and it's
Right.
so easy to make it a habit because it's so satisfying and quick.
Hmm.
Um, so all that kind of, was happening along with the fact that my dad in 2009 when we purchased Filene's, he always had heart disease, and I actually have lost four of my younger siblings to heart disease,
Mm.
one kind or another. And he was not, he had just had a couple of stents put in, and he was really not doing great. And uh, he we got this call about 6 months before he passed. I mean, I no one knew he was that
Right.
close to passing at all. But the point is, it was very exciting. I had gone to school in Boston. He loved the history of the Filene's basement. It had been something that they had approached us 10 years earlier when they were going through a bankruptcy, and they were bought by Jay Schottenstein, who owns DSW
Hmm.
and several other retail companies. And they had put a ton of money into Filene's basement stores that had nothing to do with the Filene's department store anymore. They were completely independent and privately held. There were 27 stores, and they were dominant in the women's area. We were dominant still 60% in the men's area. So we thought that was a great opportunity. So that gives you a little background to what is chapter 11 in my book. I think this might be an opportune time to
Yeah.
bring this in. Chapter 11, which is, interestingly enough, called Filenes and the Beginning of the End. And I have these little quotes at the beginning of the chapters. This one is, "A woman is like a tea bag. You don't know her strength until she gets in hot water." And that's by Eleanor Roosevelt,
The great.
the Great. In 1999, we were approached by the owners of Filene's Basement, an off price retailer right in our lane, about acquiring the company, which was then seeking to come out of bankruptcy. We didn't do a deal then. Over the next 10 years, they were acquired by Retail Ventures, J. Schottenstein Holding Company for DSW Shoe Chain. He put a lot of money into redoing the stores, and by 2009, they were beautiful, maybe too beautiful for off-price stores. Remember Syms' black walls? And they were stocked with high-quality merchandise, much of it from his import company. When they came back to us in 2009, again during a bankruptcy, we listened. They were a great fit for us. They approached us in March, and negotiations dragged on through the bankruptcy proceedings in Delaware. In July, our lawyers, Lowenstein Sandler from New Jersey, produced a Monmouth leather-bound book consisting of legalese and hundreds upon hundreds of pages of lists of Filene's real estate property, leases, assets, liabilities, and the rest. Well, we won the bidding against Men's Warehouse. It didn't help that at the same time, Cy was visibly declining. He passed away on November 17th, 2009, just months after we closed the deal. My due diligence had clearly shown a difference in our corporate cultures, which to my eternal regret, I chose to downplay. We were fiscally conservative, pay as you go, fund expansion with profits. They were funded through debt. We'd have sandwiches at the store during our meetings. They went out for lunch to fancy restaurants. They had a corporate jet. We had corporate cars. I was eventually persuaded that our customer demographics were similar and we both had the same message to our customers. They felt they got a great deal in each of our stores. On paper, this was a dream deal for Syms. Cy thought it would help us with younger women, an area where, despite the Marcy's Place and everything else we had done, we were still behind. And it would be a poke in the eye to Men's Warehouse, who was also bidding on Filene's and building stores always within 2 or 3 miles of a Syms store. We would be extending the life of Filene's, a place where I had shopped while at Boston School. The economics seemed quite digestible. There was a lot of celebrating after the deal closed. These were two historic, venerable names, known and beloved in their markets, and the key part of the clothing industry for 50 years in taking overruns and making long-term commitments. I felt joy at saving Filene's, jubilant that Filene's would be an ongoing business, not just a website. I was proud that it gave Cy hope for the future, his own and the company's. And then I go on to talk about the fact that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it doesn't help if you have two accounting firms who are looking for their next deal with the big fish, and we were the little fish. And that's when people say, what did you learn? What lesson did you learn?
Right.
That's the lesson I learned. Do not be the little fish.
Well, it really, as someone I can say, someone who has family with long roots in the Boston area, we were big Filene's Basements shoppers. Getting a good deal is like a religious commitment in my family. And it really felt like the end of an era. And I can only imagine, that's just as a shopper, I can only imagine what it was like to try to manage this process for a family business that you had been, working in and running for so many years. But one of the things that I really love about the way you write about it in the book is not only that you kind of pull out the learnings, but also you're honest about how hard that phase was, and also all the wonderful things that it enabled in your next chapter as a philanthropist and an activist. So tell us a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing, especially because so much of it is around women's equity.
Right, right. Well, having always been involved with women and equal rights, during college, going to Washington with marching and all that, I had the opportunity I went to the funeral of Muriel Siebert, the first woman to have a seat on the New York Stock Exchange, a Southern Jewish woman. And she was very, very kind to me, and a figure in an early part of my career. And I was at her funeral, and I was sitting next to Carolyn Maloney, someone who I also knew because my brother Stephen had introduced me to her when she first ran for Congress. They lived in the same building in Manhattan. So Carolyn asked me, Marcy, what are you doing now? And I said, well, I'm on a couple of boards, and I'm working at the Cy Syms Foundation, and we're trying to redirect some of our engagements and yada yada. She looked at me with somewhat, disbelief, and she goes, I have something for you. And she told me about these very brave women who were joining together with their legal expertise and their corporations to start the ERA Coalition, a way in which to get all the women around the country who were working, still working, but losing touch with each other, but wanting to get the last 3 states to pass so that there would be 38 states and the ERA would become law. That's the Article 5, 38 states, right? So that's what I did. I joined, I threw myself in full everything into this effort, and we did it. I mean, with enormous commitment and hard work of people in the 3 states, Illinois, Nevada, and Virginia, we were able to get those 3 states miraculously, in many cases, to flip a couple of seats in their state legislatures in order to be a state that supported the federal ERA. That's to become part of the federal Constitution. And then I believed that it was important for us to change our strategy after that happened. And although I had served as chair, and I was on the board, and then as chair, I felt it was important to change our strategy as an organization. And doing so, I could not convince enough people at the organization that that was the right thing to do. So I thought it was time to move on, and I did, and help start the ERA project. Um, and we now have the ERA project at NYU Law School. We're actually have a convening on February 27th.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Um, well, the story of the ERA is incredible, and it's another example of just how much how many generations of effort sometimes is required to make change, and all the ways that that can happen, even when we've sort of given up hope in some ways.
Yeah.
Um, you end the book on a note that really resonated for me right now because the world feels so overwhelming and exhausting and frankly somewhat terrifying.
Yeah.
And you end with a chapter about how important it is to recharge our batteries, so that we can keep going because we know that change takes such a long time and we have to kind of be in it. Um, Share with us a little of your wisdom about what some of those strategies can be.
So there are little things, I'm not sure bubble baths do it for me, but, people talk about taking a long bubble bath with their favorite music and a little Prosecco and, yeah, going for a massage. So there's taking breaks and being aware of your daily, weekly, monthly maintenance, know when I tend to run myself down a little bit too much, but it's much more effective if you do these intermittent stop gaps. When I left the when I left Sims, actually, it took me, I would say, because that really broke me down medically too. I had some medical issues after that. It was such a struggle. It was like every morning saying, "Okay, put your one foot in front of another. Just put one foot in front of another. We're almost through the day. It's 4 o'clock. Just put one foot in front of another." So, by the way, self-talk is very important.
Yeah.
There are a couple of poems that I would recite to myself. Music to me is very important. But I had the opportunity after leaving the ERA Coalition and starting the ERA project. I was really feeling very burnt out. And of course, the fact that the amendment was not recognized and it did not generate the political will necessary to get it implemented.
Or at least not yet.
Not yet, not yet. And we don't want to do it now because the Supreme Court will give it a
Right.
deep six. Um, but anyway, it's taken over 100 years to get here. We don't want some impetuous moment to make this end here and now for the ERA. So, bearing that in mind, I pursued something totally different. And I applied to a program at Harvard called the Advanced Leadership Initiative. And it was kind of funny. I had had a friend who had gone there, and she totally changed her career. She had been the head of Catalyst, a
Mm.
very important women's organization that helped women and corporations get women on boards and study women in rooms. And she was terrific. And after taking this program at ALI, she decided she wanted to be a teacher. And up until just a couple of years ago, she taught at NYU. Um, so I decided I had already had a project because they ask you to do a project while you're there. So I applied to this program. I said, I already have a project, but I need to learn more. And what I'd like to do is go up there and research at Radcliffe because they have a fabulous library there.
Amazing, amazing.
Am-
It's history
right?
library. Yeah.
Unbelievable papers. And
That is, in fact, where JWA's archive is at the Schlesinger Library. Our own organizational papers are archived at the Schlesinger Library at Radcliffe.
oh my goodness, I don't think I knew that.
It's
Wow.
new they only got there a couple years ago. So,
Oh, that's wonderful. Wonderful. Oh, I love that place. So, anyway, to their credit and to Mike Emery's credit, who's in charge of admissions, they let me do it. And it was fantastic. I really felt like it was a spa for my brain. I was able to get out of myself. I was able to forget, not forever, but
mhm.
long enough to reframe, long enough to put it in context in a way that didn't hurt. And it helped me think about the Sims past as well.
Yeah.
But that really I needed, and I needed a very understanding husband and son who allowed me the luxury of being a student again.
Hmm.
I mean, I lived there. I lived in Cambridge. It was fantastic.
It is such an important reminder that we're how energizing learning can be and that we can always be learning in new ways. And in fact, I would say that is really one of the kind of foundational principles that JWA's work is built on, that there is always more for us to learn and know. And when we put ourselves, we hope that the virtual programs we provide, like the book talks and history courses and stuff that we do online, that many folks come to every Thursday night, or sometimes just drop in when you feel like you need a little, shot in the arm of energy I love that expression of a spa for your brain. That's what we hope we provide for folks because we know that when the world feels so overwhelming, when we can dig in and learn something, we learn about ourselves, we learn about the world, and it can be just a refresh in such a important way. I'm so glad that you were able to have that
Yeah.
experience, which then you bring to all the other things that you've continued to do.
Absolutely. You look with eyes that see color more brightly. and your emotions are feeling, recharged. It was wonderful, and I think that I just finished in 2023, so it's really been great, and we've done a lot of new things at the foundation as a result of that reframing.
Well, that I think is a wonderful note to end on, though I could talk to you for so much longer, Marcy, and I didn't even get through most of my questions, but we'll continue the conversation another time. But thank you so much, Marcy, for sharing your story with us and all of your insights and wisdom. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. And I wanted to say also in the theme of archives that the Cy Syms archive is soon going to be available at the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati and online, thanks in part to the support of the Cy Syms Foundation, which is helping the archive make more material accessible. And that is a wonderful gift to the world. So thank you, Marcy. And I want to say that there's always more to discover at JWA. And so we put some links in the chat, and I have a couple more that came up in the conversation tonight that I want to add. You can learn more about Marcy through her oral history, which we are very honored to have as part of our Tanner Oral History Collection. In our encyclopedia, you can learn about Jewish women entrepreneurs from antiquity through the early modern period and about Jewish women's roles in advertising and consumer culture in the US. In our This Week in History collection, you can learn about Lillian Vernon, whose mail order company was the first woman-owned business to be listed on the American Stock Exchange, and Muriel Siebert, who Marcy mentioned. And of course, at jwa.org, there are too many women for me to even mention who led multi-generational family businesses, from the matzah queen Regina Margaretten to Nikki Russ Fetterman of Russ and Daughters Appetizing Shop. And then the last thing, which I'm going to put in the chat right now, is because Marcy, you talked about the ERA. We did a podcast episode on some of the work that was being done in the last several years around trying to revitalize the ERA.
Hmm.
So lots of opportunities for people to explore more and keep learning, because we know, as Marcy said, that will help keep our batteries charged. I hope you'll join us next Thursday for a conversation with Wendy Zierler on her book, Going Out with Knots, My Two Kaddish Years with Hebrew Poetry. And until next time, take care, everyone, and let's take care of each other. Good night, and thank you
Thank you.
so much, Marcy.